Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Rob, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be with you today.
I'm excited to be with you as well and to hear about what you do in your work with your own business and then also as a professor in human resources. But before we get to all of that, I would like to hear about you and the first job you ever had as a young person.
Oh, my first job was I pumped gas. So I'm from Canada, and w the equivalent in the US is Exxon. It was called Esso up there, and yeah, I was the full service gas person, wiping down windshields, checking oil, and um, it was a great high school job.
So, how long did you have that, and what was the management like?
The management, well, I got the job because we knew management and the owners, so that helped. Which I think happens a lot when you're in high school, right?
Right?
It was great. It was a small group of us that rotated through shifts and we'd swap. And it, so we never actually worked adjacent to each other.
Mm.
So the opportunity for conflict really wasn't there. There were other people on site. Um, like in the service bays and the store and stuff like that. But that concept of conflict that never really presented itself as it related to that. So it's interesting now that I think about some of these things in retrospect, because
Right.
I'm sure there's, I think I hear my son, who's the same age as I was when I was doing that, kind of talking about conflict and things like that. And I wonder to what extent is that, conflict's no new concept. It's always existed, but maybe we process it differently today than we did in the past because of all this other stuff that's going on around us. And it really is really easy to see conflict now everywhere in the media.
Mhm.
Whereas growing up, we had, a handful of television channels and that was kind of it.
It's such a good point that certainly our culture and our experience frames what we even see, right? What we're told to look for, right? Our attention is so much of what we think is good or bad. But
Yeah.
also, those experiences in work when we're first starting out, we don't have anything to compare it to. And the kind of solo work that you're doing, as you said, I mean, there's nobody else to like fight with to do this windshield, or I did it last time, you do it this time, right? That kind
Yeah.
of friction that can
Yeah.
come up. It doesn't have to come up. It depends on the people there and, of course, the management expectations and all that kind of stuff. So, where did you go after pumping gas?
I went off to college. So I came to the US and I did my 4-year degree in Iowa. And yeah, and then that's just kind of the kickoff to me living in the US now, now living here longer than I've lived in Canada.
So, what did you major in college?
Speech communications.
Hmm.
Eventually, right? I don't know. It was one of those things that I started out this way and then I did that and that's eventually where I landed.
Why there? Why did you land there?
There's some truth about being drawn to certain teachers.
Mhm.
And so it was a liberal arts college. So the nice thing about that is you had a variety of different instructors, right? Great exposure to humanities, arts, all these different things. And I kind of found a home and a connection and interest with with a certain group of faculty and that led me to pursue that, and it was only once I started to do that then I uncovered all these other interesting things that I never knew were available in terms of other courses and stuff like that that piqued my interest in directions I just never would have thought. um, you know, just things that never crossed my mind. So one example of that is like gender studies, and that really opened my mind to a lot of things and my eyes to a lot of things. And so that's a part of my fabric today. It was funny. We were on vacation last week, and my wife was working on something, and I had to reach back to my poetry class, like for mechanics and things. So you never know when these things are going to come in and how they're going to influence the path you're traveling in life. But I I attribute a lot of kind of my critical thinking to that turn from one major to another, and then the things that kind of were presented in front of me along the way.
It's, I think, a very articulate representation of what happens to a lot of people in college, right? We go in
Yeah.
with one idea because we're young, we don't know much, and then what a liberal arts education can give us is an education. In other words, showing us things that we hadn't considered before. Why should we have considered those things before? We're
Yeah.
17, 18, right? And then how do we really make decisions if we're not informed? So if we don't know the options available to us, it's kind of odd to say, well, this is what I chose from the variety of possible things when I don't know what those possible things are. And also the importance of people in our life, whether they're faculty or mentors at a job, how that can really change the whole fabric of the trajectory of our life when somebody takes an interest or when we see the way somebody else is in the world and it's attractive to us in some way and we want to go on that journey with them. The just the real importance of being present for others and being available to others gives us the permission to follow those faculty
Yeah.
members. I was a faculty member for a very long time and taught philosophy. Very few people come into the university majoring in philosophy, right? And so, how do we get philosophy majors from
One
intro
of
to
my favorite
philosophy
courses.
classes, right? And
Exactly.
because people don't know about it, I didn't know about it when I entered college, but it's through as with so much in life that's valuable to us, it has to do with relationships and connections that we make
Yeah.
that show us the next.
Yeah.
Um, what a wonderful experience. All right, so you went through college, and where did you end up after that?
Oh boy, grad school, started moving different universities, then started to get into a university track as a professional. And just kind of, as you know, in education, the only way you get ahead essentially is to jump around, right? And it's tough to keep climbing up, and especially going from like a staff rank to an academic rank within the same institution is really challenging. So I eventually, prior to where I am now in Idaho, my last stop was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan at Northern Michigan University.
Wonderful. So, did you always know that well, once you started going to graduate school, that you wanted to be a professor? Is that what you
No,
wanted to
not at
do?
all.
Not at all.
No, not at all. Not at all. It wasn't even a concept. I wasn't enamored by it one bit. Um, Actually, part of the truth of the matter was I was really, so I'm a systems person and strategy person. And I talk about this often that if I didn't have a strategy, I couldn't make it through a day. And I'm a living example of a life strategy. Um, and so when I was in my undergraduate degree, I had desires of being a president of a university because I saw the systems and the options for improvement and things like that. So I'm very much a builder. And it wasn't until I kept climbing on the staff side that I realized I have to get a faculty appointment for so many different institutions if I ever wanted to be president. And but then eventually I got into that faculty realm, um, and everything's new and developing in a different way. Just like to your comment of how you go to college and you don't know what you don't know, and then you find those things out. And so that shifted. My wife reminds me because I'm receiving offers and invites to presidencies, and she's like, "You just this is not the time for this. Just keep doing what we're doing, and when it's time, we'll go ahead and look at that." So that's kind of where I'm at now is that I'm a professor, human resource development. I teach adults. My graduate and undergraduate students are all adult, um, mid-career people looking for that education piece and that development piece. And it just so happens to be that's my focus with organizations too, is developing employees and organizations. Um, when you look at our business, and my wife and I run the business together, she does a lot more individual and self-development leading into team. And I take it from there and go more into the organizational development piece. And so as long as this remains fun, we're going to do it, and we're having fun.
That's wonderful. It is interesting how we start out in a career and we think we're going to go one way, and then
Yeah.
we get into it and decide, well, what really resonates with me? Where do I want to spend my time? What is fun? And where are my strengths? And you mentioned that you are strategic and a builder. Has that always been a part of your personality, or did something happen and you're like, I got to get it together and this is the way I need to live?
Um, I don't, I think if you went back to high school, I wouldn't be the one voted least likely to succeed, but I wouldn't have been most likely to succeed. I was right in the middle of the bell curve. Let's just say it that way. And so I've always had a curiosity about building and systems and had a knack to identify
Mm.
pieces that relate to that and the interconnectedness of stuff. And yeah, I found my way through navigating those spaces and lots of touching. So, unrelated to our conversation, during COVID, we had a couple businesses we had to shut down, but we bought a Ford Transit big van because we didn't know if we'd ever fly and travel again. So we're like, let's build a camper van. And so built it all by hand. And that's part of my curious nature is I really like to touch things and build things and take them apart and do something different. And for me, that's super fulfilling and rewarding to do that kind of stuff. And so that just parlays into that organizational life and even personal life. Like I do a lot of self and team development, stuff like that. But I think my knack is on a much larger scale looking at the system overall. So, and that's part of, I think where part of our conversation is going to go today too, is that conflict stems from a variety of different things, right?
Well, let's just talk about that. So, when you think
Okay.
about systems and you've talked about curiosity, I think, we think when we start breaking down how to think about conflict or what causes conflict, a lot of it is a lack of curiosity, a lack
Hmm.
of really taking a step back and looking at all the different sort of causes instead of just scapegoating one thing, one person typically, or something. So, why don't you just tell us about how you approach conflict? Yeah, from a systems standpoint, or however you'd like to start talking about it.
Oh my goodness. How do I now better than I have in the past, but not well originally. So part of my wiring is kind of I avoided conflict. I tell this story often, especially to my clients. I was raised in a household that was very loving, very average, and and except for we didn't have difficult conversations, and we didn't have confrontation, and so I brought that through my life for the early years, and I wronged people because of that. There's actually
Mm,
another podcast out there where I had to explain these situations, and I realized that if I was to be a compassionate, loving human to other people, I needed to have these difficult conversations. I
mm,
needed to not avoid the conflict, but actually lean into it and work through it to improve relations and processes and systems and things like that. And so we spend a lot of time talking about that now. Part of my challenge is my kind of my innate personality is I fear it. I avoid those things, and so I'm a testament of skill development, right?
mhm.
So I have a choice. I either let my my innate preferences guide me in ways that probably don't help me well in the long run, or I build the skills to overcome those things. So just like even now, like I'm a real introvert, but most people don't recognize that in me during stage presence time and consulting and stuff. But it's a skill. It's something I've had to learn so I could connect with people and help them and support them, as well as bring my own self up and my family up.
Yeah, when you talked about, being conflict avoidant and what we don't realize when we are avoiding those difficult conversations is a lot of times we do it out of place of I don't want to hurt somebody else, right? I don't want to burden them. I don't want to whatever it might be. And it is typically, and one point of view, it's out of a desire to care for the other, but it is misguided, right? Because it actually distances us It
Mhm.
doesn't build those bridges. It doesn't allow for those tough things that actually connect us when we are able to have those difficult conversations. It's a way to hide. I spent my whole life being conflict avoidant, and it is my natural tendency. In fact, I just had a difficult conversation yesterday. Mild, well, it was difficult subject. And I do this professionally, and I had to do a lot of self-talk, like, okay, Mary, these are the steps. Why do you want to have this conversation? What will happen if you don't? How can you enter into this, even though normally you wouldn't have done it? And then once I did it and we had this conversation and it was lovely, I just felt so accomplished. There's something that would be so, I think, normal for many people who don't experience
Mhm.
conflict avoidance. It is a skill. It's a decision because I have decided I want higher quality relationships. And that means that I have to do something different.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts that come to mind here. There's two different things I want to respond to if I can. That 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 process you went through. So if I could do that second, because we talked to our people of an approach on how to do that, because the vast majority of people in my experience are like you and I. They're not comfortable with this, and
Mhm.
it often stems to what I want to talk about next is that preserving the relationship piece, right? And and so we look at that, and I talk about it frequently in terms of look, are we preserving the relationship? Do you not want to hurt their feelings with that difficult conversation? Or is that just a disguise for you? You don't want your ego to get in the way. That you don't want to be hurt, you don't want to feel uncomfortable. So I say, look, I don't want to I want to maintain this relationship with Mary. I don't want to come down on her or share this bad news with her. So I'm just going to avoid that. But what am I ultimately doing, right? Like if I really appreciate and love you as a human, I'm underserving you. And
Mhm.
instead, I'm prioritizing my needs, which are actually quite shallow, because your need is to hear this, right? And I bet you would agree with me in the sense of you want to know when you're doing something wrong. And that's what we talk about with our organizations. Every one of your employees set out to do a good job.
Mhm.
They need to know if they're not hitting their marks. So how do you do that? And so we talk about in terms of regular, frequent, I use the language drips of feedback and
Mhm.
conversation, both positive and negative, so that it builds that relationship, it builds that rapport, so it becomes much easier to have those difficult conversations.
That's
And
right.
then if you're still scared, here's the second part of my answer, right? If you're still scared, what I tell people, script your conversation. So because it's too easy to say, yeah, I'm going to walk down the hall and have a conversation with Mary. And then I get cold feet and then I just turn and they'll do it some other time, right?
Right.
And this way, if you at least have a script, because we're not skilled enough yet, right?
Yeah.
Some people are, they don't need a script. Maybe they need a script to be a little gentler. But for you and I, we need to know what those points are to stick to it. And so what we say is go into the script. Um, don't be apologetic, but just share with them that you have something you want to share with them and you might you that you are actually feeling uncomfortable. So if they would just sit there and listen as I read through my points, happy to answer whatever questions you have afterwards. And what we found is that if you have a high quality culture, you get tons of grace and it becomes very easy. If you have poor quality culture, it's very difficult and it's hard. But to your point, you feel good as the deliverer of the information. It's kind of like my building analogy, right? You feel like you've accomplished something and you've shared with them where you need them to be versus where they are. And doesn't mean it's not going to sting, right? But if the culture's of high quality and you've done the right things here, it might sting, but they're going to come back relatively quickly to say, you know what, thank you. I appreciate that. I needed to hear that. That's kind of how we've approached it.
Yeah, I do something very similar with my clients that when I think about having a difficult conversation, or getting over being conflict averse, or how we all have habits we have ways in which we deal with conflict or don't, but it's all a particular habit. And so that means we can do something else. And a part of getting a habit is doing it. And so practicing, whether that's in front of a mirror or with, I usually say, someone who's very friendly. So if you have a spouse, a significant other, a friend, working through it and really getting clear before you have that conversation with somebody else, which gives you confidence. And it
Mhm.
also paves the path so that other person is able to hear what you have to say. Because if you
Yeah.
start with, on the first day you came, and now it's 5 years later, right? So, this
Yeah.
person's like trying to figure out what the heck is going on. Um,
Yeah.
but the clearer you are and the more you've de-escalated yourself to be present, is a way to open up dialogue, right? So this treating others really well is also treating ourselves well. And conflict competencies, you get our skills that can be learned, which is such wonderful news. There's not just, even if we have innate preferences, we can always choose something else, right? And we can, through the process of habituation, that every win, I mean, every time you do it, I think it's a win. Even if the other person gets upset, it's still forward progress. So tell us a little bit about um, a conflict that you've had and how it went, and maybe where you are now, how you would think about it differently.
Um, if I may, I might take a little bit of liberty and edit this just a bit.
Sure.
So the conflict I had, this was life-changing for me.
Hmm.
Back as a young professional. My first leadership role, as I mentioned, um, I wasn't raised with confrontation or feedback, so I never developed those skills. And I had a staff member, and um, she was a great employee. And so we were doing an annual evaluation in May. And that was the end of the year out evaluation for her. And so she came into the evaluation with me, and no news is good news, right? So expecting like satisfactory, satisfactory, or above expectations. And so I gave her her annual review. And I don't remember exactly, but it went something like this: above expectations, does not meet expectations, above expectations. And she said, Rob, what's this about? I said, well, this is May, right? May. Back in October, you didn't do this properly. And since then, you haven't done it properly. And she was upset. She was
Yeah.
mad. And I was embarrassed. And when I saw her reaction, I realized what I did, and how I underserved her as a leader, and how I didn't honor essentially her humanity and her needs. And so it was at that point moving forward that I committed that this is an area I just have to work on. Like
Hmm.
I can't go through life like this. And this is me at 22, 23. So I feel very fortunate in terms of learning this.
Yeah.
But it still took me a number of years, followed me into different relationships, to help relationships. I'm at the point now where my wife is a testament of yes, and now he's not afraid to give feedback all the time. So like I said, I kind of tweaked it a bit, but it was so moving and instrumental in my development. And I share this with every client. Every time we talk about personality or behavioral analysis, stuff like that, we talk about this. There's a preponderance of the population that is not comfortable having these conversations. That I am part of that, but I'm also a case study of someone that's made the improvements. I choose to be very vulnerable and open to share that because I think sometimes that helps. That helps us understand that, oh, someone else is struggling with this. It's just not me. And then empowers them to ask questions, ask for further support, things like that. So I hope that works as an answer for that piece because it was life changing.
It's so crystal clear when you say what happened, as I imagine hopefully everybody listening knows what went wrong, right? As soon as something
Right.
happens, I say with conflict or any issue, early, often, swiftly, justly, right? Because if
Yeah.
you told her back in October, then that would have been fixed, right?
Yeah.
And
Or if
that's
it wouldn't, it wouldn't have been a surprise, right?
that's right. That's right. We don't want to surprise people.
Right.
We don't want to surprise bosses or other way around, right? But it's so I can see when, you're sitting at your desk and you're thinking about this, that, or the other, and you say, "Oh, what is a manager or what is a boss? Okay, these people are doing these things aren't, and I'm keeping score in a kind of way." Because of this, certainly this artificial structure, I think obviously it's very artificial of the yearly evaluation. And some people, depending on what the scale is, nobody's going to get a five. Everybody's going to be, whatever it might be. And
It's a game.
yes, a game is demoralizing for most people who need to
Yeah.
go through this. But, to all of a sudden just see so clearly with her, the person's reaction. It's so, we spin these narratives in our minds when we're alone. And that's how a lot of conflict escalates, because I'm having this conversation about this other person who's misbehaving by myself, and I'm supplying all the narrative. And so the more I do that and I don't get into a conversation, the more I have spun this
Mhm.
particular story. But as soon as the other person's in front of me, everything changes, because now I've got a real person with their own account and their own needs and their own desires, and then the possibility to actually figure out what's going on and therefore what could be different in the future. It's
Yeah.
so different when we are confronted with others instead of just our own mind.
What you're talking about there is one aspect of like self-awareness and
Mhm.
self-regulation, right? Self-control that I, you know, I have to know what I am doing and what I'm not doing and how this is not serving me well. And I'm cutting the legs out from under the other person as I continue to ruminate over this and go down these rabbit holes. And I think if there's a skill that we can build with people that struggle with this, it is self-awareness, right? It
Mhm.
is self-awareness, self-regulation, emotional intelligence, so that they can show up better for themselves, for their employees, for their families, because there's no delineation between work and home, right? There really isn't. And we wrestle with these same things in our own personal lives. And so enhancing that really makes a difference, at least in my opinion, of how we come in curious, open-minded, and then we learn those skills of being, like you said, being swift, concise, exact, right? Things like that.
So how do we do that? I am very interested in this idea of emotional regulation, emotional intelligence. We show up at work, we're in this professional setting, we're not family or in a religious setting or something else like that. And you have people who are just in all different phases of development for a variety of reasons. And when you have people who aren't as emotionally regulated, or their emotional intelligence isn't where we would like it to be, what kind of advice do you give to managers, leaders, when people they are leading aren't able to emotionally regulate in a satisfactory way?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what path we take, right? So, like, if you want to go down the organizational development path, it becomes much easier. We start getting into a little bit of behavioral profiles, preferences, personality, emotional intelligence assessments, things like that. So now we're bringing up and we're raising attention to concepts almost on the front end, right? Oftentimes we get pulled in because there's issues and we're in the middle of it. But what it does is it becomes a primer or a primer to have these conversations following. Like now that you know this, now you have some tools to start having these difficult conversations. And they still don't in some instances. I have people that, I try to create the environment to make it really easy for that leader to have those difficult conversations, and they still defer to their fears. Now, if that's not the case and you're kind of a leader of one and you don't have a budget for something like this, I think role modeling and compassion are really important here.
Mhm.
And the curiosity element too, right? So as a leader, I believe it's important to maintain a certain level of composure, not not being plastic or fake, but but recognizing that, look, I have this gift of leadership that I'm in this role and I have to work with other people. And if I don't want that responsibility, then I shouldn't sign up for it, right?
Hmm.
But what can I do to enhance that is role model vulnerability, best behaviors, right? Clarify things through expectations, open conversation lines. And so these are all things though that we have to develop, right? So how do we, let's talk about expectations real quick because they can really help us out, right? Let's have an expectation setting session where the leader's creating expectations for the staff and the staff have an opportunity to create expectations for the leader. What a powerful coming together to determine what's above water and what's below water type of thing.
Hmm.
And being able to have that moving forward to call back on, right? Um, Holding people accountable is really important. Too much of our conflict stems from a variety of different things, but what exacerbates it is when leaders aren't holding people accountable.
Right.
And and they do the all or nothing type of thing. Like, hey, everyone, just a reminder, work starts at 9, not 9:15, 9:30, when there's only one person they should be speaking to, right?
Right.
And and
Right.
and with that, what they don't realize they're doing is they're cutting their legs out from under them.
Hmm.
With that staff's noticing that that leader does not have the confidence to handle these difficult conversations directly. So they're doing it blanket. So what happens? People, in some instances, start shoring up effort
Hmm.
and they pull back. And I believe that people want to do a good job and want to do what's right. But if the system's training them that
Hmm.
other outcomes and behaviors are permissible, then people will eventually move to the path of least resistance. I don't mean everybody, but that's what complicates a lot of our organizations where we have high performers here that really like their job, maybe like the organization overall, but they don't like what's going on with the low performers and how
Hmm.
the leader's hostage to the low performers, and
Hmm.
that's why high performers leave good organizations or they transfer within the organization. Look, this unit is not a fit for me, this job's not a fit for me due to a variety of things, but I love our mission and I want to go somewhere else. And that's if you have a lot of that shuffling, it's a kind of a clue to look into what's going on. When we have staff at times in organizations, I say, what's going on with your exit surveys with these people that are leaving this? And they're like, well, you know, they're telling us the same thing that they don't like working here. Well, I think we should look at this trend that people are all leaving. I'll use Fred as an example. Fred's the leader, and Fred's staff's always turning over, and Fred is known to say that his staff's lazy and entitled. Well, maybe the problem here is Fred. And
Hmm.
what are you doing to fix that? Because you're going to continue to bleed the system if you don't address that. And too often they're not addressing it. They're not
Hmm.
handling it because they're so conflict averse.
Hmm. It is so interesting that, th this phenomenon of not addressing because we are largely afraid of something. We don't have the tools, we don't know how to, don't
Yeah.
lack the confidence. And so we send out that memo that's meant for that one person. That one person doesn't get the message, but other people get this message of, but what about me? Why
Yeah.
aren't you seeing me? Why am I getting this about being on time or having no typos in my, I don't have typos. Do you think I have typos? Right? It's this
Right.
sometimes a kind of gaslighting that can go on. Like, well,
Yeah.
what's going on? And in every organization, we want to know, and I hear this all the time. It's not fair. I'm not being treated fairly. It's not just. We want to know what the playing field is, right? These expectations, and we want to know what there are the rewards or what's the punishments of not meeting these expectations. And so most people are conscientious. They're going to do their work. They want to do well. But then when we see other people, quote unquote, getting away with it, we lose respect for the leader, for the organization, because they won't. And if they
Yeah.
won't do this, well, they're not going to have my back.
Yeah. Exactly. Part of the reason for quiet quitting and
Hmm.
these other organizational things we're seeing. And I'm not saying that leader's not a good person, because they're trying their best. I get that. But what they need is some assistance,
Yeah.
right? So my favorite clients are the ones that reach out to me to say, look, I know my craft or my toolkit. Like we work with judiciaries, Supreme Courts, and states and stuff like that. And they're expert at their craft.
Right.
but they've never been developed as a leader, or the leadership development's been haphazard over the years in their
Mhm.
lifespan. And so they say, hey, Rob, lead us the way. We're going to go here. I know my tools. I know my craft. I need help here. And that's the best situation. And it becomes a real partnership with
Mhm.
them. But yeah, to your point, I do want to clarify because I think it sometimes sounds gloom and doom that I really do believe that people are trying the best. It's
Mhm.
just sometimes the best isn't what is needed in that position, in that situation. And so we need to seek other solutions.
I absolutely agree. There's a variety of things. What kind of person we are and how we happen to be doing at a job at a certain time are very different sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
And I think it is, and we don't think about it so much organizationally, but a lot of people are set up to fail, especially middle management,
Hmm.
right? They got promoted to
Oh,
this, and we see this with deans all the time, or department
yep.
heads. They were good at this and now they get promoted, and we teach them how to use payroll or travel or something like
Yeah.
that, but not what do I do when these people that I are managing
Yeah.
are in a disagreement or this tenured person isn't turning in what they need to turn in? What are those basic sorts of skills? And it's a very different. It, and so, in a lot of ways, organizations are failing um, as we promote. We don't give them the assistance and the continued assistance
Right.
and the support that when something comes up that's has to do with people, the messiness and
Yeah.
the individuality of the people that are around us at this time and in this situation, if there isn't some sort of somebody that we can go to, an ombuds office or something institutionally that will help, not to take it, right? I think
Right.
a lot of our organizations have infantilized people in the sense that I can't solve this problem because we're afraid of a lawsuit or we're just afraid.
Yeah.
We're not empowering individuals.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is? Because it definitely will save money. It's a no, it does save money when you deal with conflicts and you empower people to deal with their conflicts. So what do you see as to why the support is absent in many places?
Because they don't know, right?
Mm,
We don't know what we don't know, right? And so it's like whether it's a brand new employee or a brand new leader or an established leader for that matter, it's this concept of here are your keys to this office. Maybe here's your name badge as boss, right? Let me know what you need. You got this. There's this fake overconfidence in the person's ability, which is totally unreasonable and unfair. As a new employee, I don't know what I don't know in this system. And that's at every level of the organization. And so we continue to promote on qualities that aren't, even though these people are moving into these leadership roles, eh, we're we're the we're not doing a good job of evaluating qualifications and as well as fit. And so we just continue to perpetuate this. I'll tell you what my biggest fear is. I call it a pinch point, and it's that middle manager piece that you're talking about. That because organizations, let's say they're unstable or unstable as it relates to leadership efficacy across the organization, we see too many higher people pointing to that middle manager as the breakdown.
mm,
And that middle manager is just trying to do their best and keep their head above water. And the real failure is that middle manager's leader is not providing the space, the tools, the options to grow and develop in accordance with what is needed to lead successfully. And I feel really bad for that because I think that is part of the reason why the data is telling us that people don't want to move into managerial roles
hmm
is because they see how superiors in many instances, and not all, right? Not
Right,
gloom
of
and doom,
course.
that superiors just don't know how to support and empower people. They think autonomy is empowerment, and it's not. It's neglect. You
hmm
you you grant autonomy to people that are competent and capable. You don't grant autonomy to leaders that don't know what they're doing, even though they're trying the hardest, right? And so, it's one of my soapboxes is about these trainers that go out and say you need to increase job satisfaction by granting more autonomy. And I think that's one of the most dangerous concepts and haphazard concepts just to say increase autonomy. It depends.
Yeah.
If Mary's a seasoned veteran, she's an expert, no spelling errors, like you said, she gets all the autonomy she needs and deserves.
Hmm.
But someone else that's brand new, they need some hand-holding, they need some role modeling, they need some coaching, they need some development. And so it really speaks to this, varied or situational approach to what people need. And that's where I think we lose it in the organizations is that um, the higher we climb in organizations, I think sometimes the more we forget about the struggle to get there. And we forget that the people need direction, clarification, some marching orders. And I see this a lot in institutions, all sorts of
Hmm.
institutions. You think, and you talked about deans and stuff like that. And, we're a real great case study in higher education of some of these problems because experts in a discipline that have nothing to do with leadership, yet we've advanced. And maybe we do have some great leadership skills and abilities, but we're not, I don't believe that institutions are screening these properly to put the right people in the right job. And then what I've seen is that they say, well, let's just wait for this new person to come in and fix it. Well, the person has no context. The person might be an expert in whatever their craft is, but they're not going to fix anything. It's such a naive approach.
Yeah.
And as well as the fact of, I received pushback once. I said, what are the marching orders for this new VP? I said, they get to determine that. I was like, okay, well, we're setting this person up for disaster right out of the gate.
Yeah.
If the top level leadership have not established what the path, the strategy, the expectations are for this new position, this person essentially it feels like they have all the lumber and they just have to build their own house when in reality they don't get to choose what kind of house they build, right? So it's a dangerous place to be. So I appreciate you bringing attention to this because we do need to do better at helping leaders at all different levels appreciate the challenges of whether it's a new person leader, things like that. Not to
Clarity.
mention, if I could
Yeah,
just ask one
please.
last thing, as you think about conflict,
Hmm.
you do this well, it really mitigates so much conflict that that you could pay attention to leading and changing and growing and developing and not putting out all these institutional fires that are tied to behavior. And so it's you either pay now or you're going to pay later, right?
That's 100% true when it comes to conflict. And sometimes the paying is a public lawsuit. That happens all the
Yep,
time.
yep,
Certainly quiet quitting.
yep.
There's so many things that go along when we don't solve people's real problems or have a mechanism
Ah,
for them, better yet, to solve it themselves. And
exactly.
so that we don't invest up front, then you're just going to be putting out fires. How are you supposed to being whatever institution you are for the future, how are you really supposed to take advantage of the diversity around you? Diversity is a good, we have different ideas, but
Yep,
the more we ask for different kinds of people at the table, the more we should expect that we don't all have the same vision, background,
yep,
expectations, opinions, that we ought to have conflict. And that means we need to be able to have these adult conversations so that we can be creative and inventive and have this workplace satisfaction. But that is only going to come about intentionally. I mean, every
yep.
once in a while, you have these golden where these people just come together. But sustained over a long period of time is going to take intentionality. And the thing is, they are just skills to be learned, but then to be insisted on. I talk about like civility standards, like, well, what is it here right now? And what does that actually mean? And
Hmm.
articulating that and having these open dialogues, which sounds like it takes so much time, but it's so much less time. If you're told, as in this example, to go build a house, and you're like, great, maybe they don't even want a house. They wanted a summer home or a tree
Right.
home, and you made it out of
Yeah,
brick, and they wanted. Why would you do
exactly.
that? It takes so much more time when you're flailing around.
Yeah. One of the conversations I have with my people I work with, and they appreciate my candor. And then with people I'm not yet working with, which I don't think they appreciate my candor in the same conversation, is that you're one bad hire away.
Mm,
And the concept, what I mean there is, and a lot of people I meet with say, hey, we got it all figured out. It's working out well. When in reality, I know that it's not, or it's okay.
mhm,
And these are just the dynamics of the the meshing of the team to a certain extent,
mhm.
right? And you know this, you just take one person and you change one person, and it could really enhance the team, or it could tank a team.
Yeah.
And so, what is your strategy to be resilient and ready for that? And
Yeah.
that's why that argument of you really want to pay for this now in terms of culture work, development work, building these skills, growing this culture so that that culture is the grease in the gears or problems. And
Hmm.
then it backs into onboarding. And then right on day one, we're setting people up to understand what's acceptable in this community, what's not acceptable, things like that. And that's what creates agile organizations. It helps them shift quickly, do things, that weren't expected because of the dynamic of that culture. But I still run into that. Like I said, the people I work with appreciate that perspective because they realize the risks are real. The people that choose not to work with anyone think they got it figured out, and then we hear from them in a couple of years once the place is on fire or they have some real significant problems.
Yeah, I do. When somebody says, "Oh, everything is fine here,"
Yeah,
and especially if a leader says that, and I always, of course, I always want the best, and I hope that is the
yeah,
case. And maybe it is the case right now, but as you said, it just takes one person to leave or get sick, a new person to come in, because as we know, one person can just wonderfully transform an organization. And as you said,
yeah,
one person can tank it. And if we practice now how we want to be in the future, we're going to be able to spot things sooner, right? Because the sooner you find that cut, you can do something about it. But if it happened in October and you're talking about it in May, right?
yeah,
How demoralizing that is. When we
yeah,
think about if we want belonging, we want psychological safety, we have to be proactive and continually keep our eye on the ball so that we have those conditions, or else, I mean, everything is in the process of falling apart, right? I can do my dishes today
yeah,
and I'm done, right? I did my dishes.
right.
Woohoo! Actually, they're not done. I need to go home and do them. But because I chose last night to sit on the couch with my family and watch something, and it was my night to do the dishes, and they're still sitting there. If I chose that again tonight, I mean, even though I did them, yes, 2 days ago, all chaos. We would have no dishes. What are we eating out of paper plates now? Because if I say to myself, oh, well, I did that, I did the laundry. Well, that's not how laundry works. And that's not how
Yeah,
culture works. And that's not the people dynamics. And so, two people who are getting along famously, something can happen.
yep.
And we can use that to make their relationship stronger. Or if it's not addressed, it can start putting a wedge and then things unravel quickly.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to add in, because I think it's really relevant now, we've been focusing on the people aspects and that one bad hire can really change, or one good hire can change an organization. We're moving forward. There's a lot of destabilization in the world right now.
Mhm.
Um, and we don't know what's coming up. We know that if you have nonprofit clients, some of their funding sources are being threatened. If you have higher education clients, you know their funding sources are being threatened. If you have businesses, market conditions are going to start shifting really quickly in odd ways. That's what
Mhm.
we can anticipate. That in and of itself is enough of, to me, an argument of why we need to build our culture so that we can remain agile against conditions. Why are we still talking about return to work and remote working now, this far after COVID? And that's the
Yeah.
perfect case study. We didn't do it right before COVID, and then we had to pivot, shift, do react, all these things, and now we're trying to fix things that we should have been addressing 10 years ago in
Yeah.
terms of culture. And so we have a real mess right now internally in organizations. So even organizations themselves, in terms of the human capital element, are destabilized. That's before we look at market conditions. And
Hmm.
so this is once again that argument for you're going to pay for it at some point.
Hmm.
And that lawsuit or whatever that thing is down the road, or even just someone quitting, the cost to replace that person
Hmm.
is significant.
Hmm.
You can offset some of those costs earlier on to cultivate these experiences in staff. And then, even furthermore, let people have more fun at work, cultivate joy, job satisfaction, people wanting to be there. And that is going to take you so much further in the long run.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, if we want if we want to win in the future, like
Yep.
what does that look like? And that looks, if we want high performers, if we want to attract talent, if we want to have the best service and products, if, well, when you go into an organization and everybody looks pained to be there,
Yeah.
right? And they're wiping off their tears from crying in the parking lot, like literally,
Yep.
and they've got their finger on the can I quit today? What does that feel like to work with them? Right? It doesn't feel great. And whether or not the clients know it comes that attitude out. And so the question is, do you want to be in business? Do you want to do your mission? And that means you have to invest in the people in front of you because they're going to be doing the work to get your clients or service, whatever you're doing. And if you fail to see that and really think about how do I build this community? How do I help people flourish and thrive? If you're not intentionally if you think that's a nice to have instead of a must, then you are losing right now.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And the other piece of it too is, and I talk about this often, is I want my employees to go home with their fuel tank partially full so that they can be with their family at night, so that they can be present in the things they want to do. Maybe it's not family, maybe it's friends, maybe it's volunteering after hours. Maybe, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe it's getting to the gym. Like you have no fuel left. If your job's sucking it out of you, it's hard to muster up the energy to be present and engaged after hours. And so
Yeah.
that's our target. That's our goal is that work can't always be awesome,
Yeah.
but in the long run, is it good enough? Is it fun? Is it lighthearted? Do I have people that I consider friends that I work with?
Hmm.
Um, right? And it enhances the home life and vice versa.
Hmm. Your motto for your business, Black River Performance Management, is work should fuel the spirit, not drain it. And
Yes.
I can imagine all the listeners thinking, if they're lucky enough to be there, they think,
Yeah.
I really have a good. And if you don't have that, imagining,
Yeah.
imagining a better future for yourself, or I'm all for trying to work within the organization you have to bring about the good for yourself and others.
Yeah.
But that vision of work is going to be difficult at times. I was just talking to somebody and they're all remote, but thinking about possibly getting together. Like, well, we can't do that for the foreseeable future because we're just too busy. We're too busy to do the basic stuff of a meeting or having a meal together or whatever it
Yeah.
might be, which actually makes the work harder, which makes you right. It
Yeah.
implodes on itself.
Yeah. I think the end of 24, we did a little retreat in the woods, and I put it on my LinkedIn, and I just called it something like, "We don't have time not to take time."
Yeah.
And this is what you're talking about. It's common with new clients. They're like, "Okay, we could give you 45 minutes," and it's like, "Well, I need 6 hours minimum day one."
Right.
Right. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then eventually I get them there and they realize it. But you need to take time to heal, to grow, to think, to
Yeah.
reflect, right? Um, Not everyone, works well under high pressure or high stress. Most people don't. I think there is a group that do, and then a lot that claim they do, or just it's convenient for them. Um, but it's like why we go on vacation. Our body needs to, or why we sleep at night.
Hmm.
Our body needs to replenish, repair itself so we can go back to do the stuff whatever we're going to do. The same thing's true for organizations. I do facilitation for strategic planning with groups, and this is a big challenge because they're like, well, we can't slow down. We have to get this done, but we can't take time off. And how are you going to arrive at some ideas, directions, targets, strategies if you don't unplug for just a bit to determine what is working and what isn't working, and then question what you believe is working and isn't working, and then doing it at aggregate with a bunch of people, right? It's a process in and of itself for good reason. It's that we need the time and space to do that.
That's such a good point. I think when we get human nature wrong, we get it all wrong. When we start
Hmm.
treating people like machines and we're just
Yep.
cogs and we set this program in and now we're going to execute it. But how does thinking take place? What is thought work? And of course, many times we arrive at that eureka when we're out walking, when we are doing something else and it's just sort of going in the back of our minds, or we get space from it. And then we're able to see it with new eyes and ask those good questions so that we are better in the long run. But when we fail to understand, or, I don't have time to take vacation, you don't have time to get burned out, is what you really don't have. And if you don't take care of yourself, it'd be like saying, I don't have time to sleep. We all realize that, I mean, you will die. You like literally physically will die pretty soon, probably a
Yeah.
couple of weeks or less if you don't sleep. You
Yeah.
will get burned out, and then you're not burned out, you take a week off. That's not how burnout works, right? The
Right.
recovery.
Yeah.
And so we have to take care of ourselves and we need to have those organizational structures. And so if somebody says, I'm just going to power through, we say, well, that's not what we do here,
Yeah.
right? And then we,
Exactly.
we make that the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it comes back to leader. How are you role modeling this?
Yeah.
How are you prioritizing this with your team? Stuff like that. So yeah, really relevant stuff. Really, really important stuff for people at all levels to be a part of.
Yeah. So, Rob, as we end our
Hmm.
conversation, I feel like I could talk to you for a
Yeah.
very long time. What is something that when you look into the future of work that you think needs to happen so that not only is every worker treated with dignity and respect, because that's like a baseline, right? That's
Yep.
a minimum qualification.
Yeah, right.
But we want more than that. We want people to thrive and flourish. So, what do you think needs to happen for that to happen?
So many different things. I think conditions have to be there. So what are the conditions in the organization to permit this, to make this a priority,
Mm-hmm.
right? Resourcing needs to happen. I was disappointed the other day. I was working with a group where we were exploring an engagement, and their group focuses on the development of other people, yet they decided not to invest in the development of their people, right? So, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean you have to do it with us. It doesn't
Right.
matter to me. You do it with whomever. I'll send them over to you, Mary. But the point was is that they weren't shopping around at all,
Yeah.
and I think organizations have to be more mindful of that. One of the things I find interesting is when people manage budgets almost personally, in the
Mm.
sense of I've seen organizations where they have line items for development, yet, and their boards or their leaders have given them that, but they don't want to use it because I don't quite understand it. And my point is that look, this is money allocated for your team, for your organization, for development, for healing, for whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things I think we have to shift is recognizing that these are not my own personal funds, that this is what the organization said that we're going to do. We're going to prioritize this. Why am I bottlenecking this, or why is that person bottlenecking? So I think it's a number of different things. Um, One of the things I really believe, and this was a really cool experience, we were doing a board of directors retreat and strategic planning update in Park City. And so it was over several days. And because we focus on people and development, at the end of the retreat, the CEO sat back and said, it's just occurring to me now that we might be focusing on the wrong things here, that we're prioritizing so much in terms of technical training that we're not preparing the people
Mm.
to be better people for our clients, our consumers. And that's what I believe. I believe that organizations have the resources, but also the obligation to bring their people up, that helping them understand emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, all these different things, personality, leadership skills, all these different things will not only benefit the organization, this flows to the home life too,
Yeah.
to benefit that person there, because it's a two-way street going back and forth. And that's how I think we nurtured this foundational level of dignity and worth and respect is by bringing people up. And I mean, all people at all levels
Yeah.
have an opportunity to do this. Now, I get people a little riled up at times when I say, but let's look at how you're allocating the professional development. So, are you sending them to conferences? If you are, okay, that's your decision. But what are you getting in return for that $5,000 ticket to Vegas for a week, right? Are
Mm-hmm.
they actually bringing that value back? Or should we pull those funds back and do it collectively as an organization, where those funds go further and directly contribute to the culture development, the people development, things like that. So those are my thoughts.
I love that. That continued dialogue, instead of we always did it this way, we've always gone to
Yeah.
Vegas for this week.
Yeah.
And it might be the best thing, but we don't know
Yeah.
unless we ask, well, what is the best thing now? Where we
Yeah.
are now, what's going on with the market now and our people now, and that might change year to year. And
Yeah.
that continued dialogue and really thinking about how do we have the best culture. Well, Rob, thanks so much. Well, what a fun conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, so delighted. Well, take care. Thank you so much, Rob, for going on that journey with me and talking about visions for healthier work environments. I just absolutely love your motto of work should fuel the spirit, not drain it. What would that look like, dear listener, if you went to work and you weren't drained all the time? And hopefully that isn't your lot, but for many people, that is the case. And what can we do differently to support each other so that we can all have flourishing lives and not just at work? Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back, we have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you would like to watch this conversation between Rob and I online, you can find us on YouTube at 3P Conflict Restoration. If you haven't had a chance to check out my book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do, and considers what we ought to do instead to have healthy work environments. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.